Most of us can sense our society is really sick, and it grows sicker by the day. How did we go from a country founded on God to one devoted to God's destruction? Abortions up until birth, drag queens stripping for children, murder sprees driven by progressive ideology, Joe Biden's office targeting and arresting Christians and ignoring those who murder Christians, all the while praising the trans ideology driven to kill them. I have a hard time explaining all of this. None of it is reasonable or rational. All right. So let's use the Sherlock Holmes means of deduction. What could it be? What if I told you all this insanity is not the result of wokeism that is out of control, but it is connected to an ancient paganistic evil? I know. Sounds crazy. Today, I have a guest that has discovered the blueprint to an age-old menace. As a charismatic minister, he has devoted himself to unveiling the invisible mysteries that dictate our lives. His latest revelation comes in the form of his 7th book, The Return of the Gods. It reveals how the radical transformations of our society today are all part of an ancient pattern. Almost like a beast awoken from centuries of slumber, evil spirits of the old world have found a way to possess our world. I hope you think all of this is nuts, and then you will give the time to listen to what he has to say. You will have an opinion one way or the other at the end of this. Our civilization celebrates the rise of evil every day. Shout and celebrate your abortion. Remember, the devil prowls around like a roaring lion, seeking someone to devour. He is the prince of this world, and he's always looking for new converts to help fight in his war against love and light, and to bring chaos and destruction. The idea of a spiritual battle taking place in the real world does sound crazy. Doesn't to me, because it's the only way I can explain what's happening. And my guest today documents moments in history that are nearly identical to what we are seeing play out in the news today. Some of it is stunning. If we do nothing, we're just as guilty as the German Christians in Nazi Germany, who heard the trains pass their church, and all they did was sing louder to drown out the screams. I invite even the most agnostic among this audience to keep an open mind and welcome Johnathan Cahn. Jonathan, I've read your book. I think it's fantastic. I have been feeling this. I think a lot of people feel that we're not fighting flesh and blood, flesh and bone. We are fighting something else. It is almost like being possessed. You're talking to people, you can't reason with them. Yeah. There's nothing but hatred inside. And when we talked on the air, I just found so much truth in what you're saying, but I come from a place like you. Yeah. So I want to start our conversation with, let's lay down some terms and let's understand what we're really talking about here. Yeah. To the person who's not into ancient history or even God stuff. Yeah. Okay. So the word pagan, we hear it all the time, but what does it actually mean?
Yeah, it actually comes from when the gospel was spreading through the Roman Empire. Those who were the most resistant lived in the hills, and pagan was linked to that. So what it really means is that which is outside of Judeo-Christian revelation culture.
So it would be like somebody who's an infidel to Muslims?
Yeah, but really, it's almost like everything else. Like when you look at culture before the word, before the Bible, everything outside of Israel and outside of Christianity, particularly the worship of gods or polytheism, pantheism. This is pretty much the rule. On planet Earth, this is what people do without the word. So that's what it means. Yeah.
So when you look at ancient gods, they become almost laughable because, Hercules. It just seems like a bunch of stuff that people made up. And I want to understand this. You're going to talk about 3 specific gods. I mean, I know the history, but I've never seen them as separate entities.
Right.
You've called them the Dark Trinity.
Right.
So is that like Father, Son, and Holy Ghost? They all make up one? And we're really talking about one evil entity?
I would say there's an evil entity behind them. There is an enemy behind them, but they are three distinct major deities or gods or spirits. In fact, and here's the thing, there's 2 realms. One is, if you go back to the ancient world, everybody was worshiping gods. Doesn't matter where, Germany, Hawaii, doesn't matter. Everybody, which is kind of strange, But the Bible gives by the way, I was originally an atheist, so, I can identify with anybody who's like that. The Bible says, kind of a mystery here, it says that behind the gods, of the world, were entities. And the word it gives in Hebrew is the word shedim. Shedim literally means destroyers, but it says they're worshiping that. So what it's saying is behind the gods, it's not saying the gods are like masks, but there are spiritual things. You said at the beginning, and I say the same thing. There are people who are not even believers. They're liberal and, whatever, and say, what's going on? This is not natural. This is not normal. And they're right. And there is something supernatural that is behind these things. And so the Bible's saying that behind the gods were spirits. They're entities, consciousness. The gods are a mask in that sense. The word got translated into Greek by the rabbis, and they translated the word shadim into daimonia. We get the word demonic from it. We get the word demon. It's a weird thing because the Greeks called many of their gods demons. I mean, they actually called them that. And when Paul in the New Testament, he says the pagan world is worshiping the daimonia or the spirits. So the first thing is that there's something real behind them, not that the mythology, but behind them. And so when you look at pagan culture or the culture outside of the Bible, it has the same signs of demonic possession. When the closer you got to the gods, like the oracles and the priests, the more they're shaking and trembling and channeling and foaming at the mouth. That's all over the world. So you even Western civilization was part of it, except for the Bible. So you have a culture that's given to the gods, given to the spirits. But then something happened. What happened was Jesus happened.
So what we're going to talk about are the ancient rituals, but they've happened over and over again all over the world, right?
Yes.
These same things keep happening.
Yes.
So, I keep looking at the 1930s and 40s, and if I were, living at those times, I would have thought if some more of the signs had happened, I think the Lord's coming, because that is evil.
Yes.
Okay.
Yeah.
And I've never felt that way, except in retrospect. I didn't live in those times, but looking back, I think that was evil, and it was sweeping the world.
Yeah.
It's back.
Yeah.
Were they doing the same kind of stuff back then?
There's a link between it. My father was born in Germany, so he got out barely, but he witnessed this takeover of the culture, and it goes to really the key is what Jesus said, and this is crucial because with Nazi Germany, with what's happening now, and that is he gives this parable, but this parable is crucial because it says that if a spirit leaves a man, talking about exorcism, leaves a man, but it goes around looking for a place, doesn't find it, says, I'm going to go back to the man, I'm going to go back to my house. Goes back to the house or the man, finds it swept, empty, clean, in order, goes back, gets 7 other spirits. They go back, it's a repossession. Jesus said the last state is worse than the first. And so, but he said, people say, okay, that's about a person. He says at the end, he says, so it will be with this generation. He's not talking about just a person. It can happen to a culture, it can happen to a civilization. And so the warning is that any nation or civilization, I'll talk about Western civilization, was basically exorcised exorcised of these things. When the gospel came in, it was basically a mass exorcism. The gods left, and that's why the West is so different. It's been so unique. It's been exorcised of that. But the warning is to America, to the world, that if it ever turns away from God, if it ever empties the house of God, it's not going to stay empty. These spirits, the gods, the same things that were cast out of it at the beginning of the age are coming back into it. And so that happened when Germany. That's the warning, because look what happened. Germany was the land of the Reformation, land of the Bible. What happened when they turned away from God? Hitler happened. It wasn't neutral. It was demonic. Same thing happened to the Soviet Union.
So when you look at, because one of the things that really concerns me about today's society is the experts. That was all happening in Germany, especially in doctors and nurses. It wasn't the Nazis that were killing people and the babies. It was the Nazi doctors, and they led with that philosophy.
Yes.
And we're going through much of the same stuff. Canada is giving euthanasia to kids. Yeah. I mean, we're going in the same route. So is it right? I've been saying for a while, we've been so good. We've been such a bright light. Yeah. But if we go bad, we're going to reach the dark levels of our highest levels of light. Yeah. Do you agree with that?
Absolutely. It is now what was happening in, say, Germany, very dramatically, and others, is happening across the world. America is leading it, unfortunately. Yes. And the thing is, here's the thing about it, is that it's worse if you've known God. It's worse if you have been a light to the world, because then, what it's saying is it's going to be worse for the one who had known and got delivered and then got repossessed than the one who never got not delivered. In other words, what's coming is worse than what was in paganism. Right. Or put another way, the pagan world could produce a Caligula or a Nero. The post-Christian world produces a Hitler and a Stalin. And so what's coming is worse. So absolutely right. And one of the things that pagan or the revival of these things do is it devalues life. And this was in the pagan world. People could be killed, babies could be killed, and old people could be killed. So once you devalue life, this is what the gospel undid. It said every life is sacred. This is now going out the window. And what you have is what you have in Canada. 10,000. They said 10,000 people have been killed last year in Canada under the program of euthanasia. But that's where it goes. That's what's happening.
Okay. So now let's break down and talk about, first of all, what's principalities? Yeah. Principalities. Okay. What is that?
Okay. It's the word that's used when I think you sort of alluded or you quoted when it says we war not against flesh and blood. Paul says that we war against principalities or powers. It's talking about forces, darkness. It's talking about spiritual forces, spirit forces. And I'm glad you brought up Germany, because you cannot explain that in the natural. You can only explain that with there's something demonic or something spiritual. So that's what it means.
Okay. All right. So you talk about three different gods. Yes. And the first God that shows up, and I'd like you to compare from ancient times to current times so you can see that's what it was. Yeah. This is happening now. Because I don't think people know, maybe some do, but I don't think people know that they're worshiping these gods. Nobody is like, hey, I'm a part of the Church of Baal. Right. Right. But we are repeating it almost exactly.
Yes. Yeah. Yeah, it's kind of scarier when you don't know it, because the fact is they're doing it without knowing it. What I call the Dark Trinity in the Return of the Gods, the first one is his name means the possessor. It means the master, it means the Lord or the owner. And this is the one we call him Baal. He was called Baal. That's what it means. And what happened is when Israel turned away from God, and the house wasn't going to stay empty, other things came in. The Bible says that Baal came in. And what happened is that the effect on the culture then in ancient Israel was that it started driving God out of everything, started almost exorcising the culture of God, driving him out of the public square, out of the government, out of life. Well, that has been happening in America. That's the first sign of it. In fact, that's part of opening the door. Like, how does it happen? Well, you open the door when you start saying, well, we don't need God here. We don't need prayer in school. We don't need this. That started in the early 60s. And when you look at all these things, that's where you see it go. Because when you open up, it's like you empty the house is isn't staying empty. If you take God out of the schools, you take God out of the children, something else is going to come into the schools.
This is exactly what Nietzsche was talking about when he said, God is dead.
Exactly.
He wasn't celebrating. People always read that like he was celebrating. No, he was saying, be careful because man will have a God. And what are you replacing God with? Because something else will come in.
And something came into Germany just like that.
Yeah.
Well, we made the same mistake. You know, we didn't do it as dramatically as Nietzsche, but we made the same mistake. We'll take God here. Well, what happened is something came into our culture, and it's not staying empty. And so what came in is this: the first spirit is that. Baal is always the first. He's kind of like that, the spirit that comes in back and says, I'm going to get my friend. So this is the opening. Baal caused Israel to turn away from God. It's the principality that takes a culture that has known God, like ancient Israel, modern America, and converts it or seeks to convert it from a Judeo-Christian nation into a pagan nation. And that's exactly, if you want to look at what's been happening to America and much of the world, it's exactly that. It's a process of paganization, and it's a repossession. And the other thing it says he did, it says he caused Israel to forget God. Well, it's like there's an amnesia that has come on America. You know, if we were in the 1950s, we would see that the teachers of this nation were leading our children into the Lord's Prayer. We can barely remember that, America. I mean, it's so foreign, but it has caused us not only to forget God, but it's caused us to forget we even knew God. We have a culture that barely even knows it ever knew it. And the other thing it says, it caused Israel to overturn the ways of God. So we have literally struck down the Ten Commandments, and just like Israel did. So what's been happening since the 60s, it hasn't stopped, a continual overturning of the ways of God, and until it leads to where we are now. But it's not just like that's kind of like the obvious ways, but there are deeper ways. For instance, wokeism and all these things we're dealing with right now. If you have monotheism, you have one truth. Everybody agrees it's one truth. If you have polytheism, paganism, you don't have one truth. You have many gods, many truths. And so you have your own unique personal truth. This is my authentic truth. If a man says, I'm not a man, I'm a cat, he's a cat. That's pagan. That's not progressive. That's paganism. There's no truth in it. Another one I brought out in the book is that the Bible says that when you turn away from God, you end up serving the works of your hands. And when Paul speaks about the pagan worship of idols, he uses interesting word. He uses a Greek word, techne. We get the word technology. So what is happening now, we turn away from God, we are actually serving our technology. We actually are glued to our technology.
It's weird because when I read that, I thought of everybody you ever see on technology, they've got their head bowed.
Yes.
And it's almost as if we are worshiping it because you become that which you gaze upon.
Yeah, and the word, it says with Israel, it says Baal was a god, but there were many forms of Baal. It says they had many Baals. The Baal means master, so you get mastered by anything, and so we are mastered by technology. We now have technology that's taking over our thoughts. We have artificial intelligence that is now a danger to us, and the Bible says the people become like what the idol they made. They become like it. Well, now we have a whole generation that's becoming less human. They're less able to interact. They're becoming more like the machine that they're on, and the machines are becoming more human. So even that, and one of the most I'd say blatant sign of Baal was, and you find it in Israel, you find it in the Bible, was a sign of a molten bull. A bronze bull was the sign of Baal all over. Well, could that appear in America? Well, if you go down to New York City, go down to where the Harbingers are, where I've talked about it, you go down, you'll see a massive bronze bull. They didn't know what they were doing, but this is a sign in the Bible of a nation that once knew God has turned away. I mean, from the golden calf to the bronze bull that has known God, turned away, is now given to the gods. And in fact, Baal was the god of their prosperity, and he's a bull. So what do we call our prosperity? We call it a bull market. We call it bullish, and that's where it all is. We didn't know what we're doing, but we did it. And you mentioned when we were talking before, is not only that, they actually erected the Arch of Baal in New York City, and they knew what they were doing in that one.
Yeah, I think I was in New York City when they did that, and
me too.
And I thought, who thought this was a good idea. Explain what happened.
Yeah, they erected in Lower Manhattan, actually right at the financial district, they erected on the grounds of City Hall the ancient Arch of Baal, the god Baal. And I was there, wanted to witness it, and you actually had signs saying Arch of Baal. They had musicians playing the music of Baal. They unveiled it with a ceremony, and they had the leaders of New York praising this whole thing, praising the arch. And you said something that this is an arch. This is a doorway.
It's a gateway.
And a gateway. Yeah, and New York is a gateway. It's the gateway of America. So you have the arch, you have the gateway of Baal at the gateway of America, a nation that has turned away from God. This is, you can't get more dramatic than that. And the other thing was, there was one other time it appeared in America, and that was in Washington. And the thing is, it was noteworthy because it appeared the very day that the hearings were on Capitol Hill for Kavanaugh, and the issue was over abortion. They knew it. The whole issue was fighting over the offering up of children. Baal was linked to that. So the Arch of Baal appears in Washington, right in front of the Capitol building where they're having the hearings. Right there, the sign which the battle is over the children being offered up, which was Baal. You can't make it up, and they didn't realize that. But there's spiritual. This is the thing. Saying it's not natural. There's something beyond natural going on.
Okay, so that's Baal. That's the first one.
Yes.
Then he lets in the next one, which is Moloch, right?
Next one is Ashtoreth, which is the goddess.
Okay.
Yeah.
Ishtar.
Yep.
Ishtar.
Yep.
Okay.
Yeah. This is in the Canaanite theology, she's the wife of Baal or the lover of Baal. But this is one of the most ancient principalities on earth, and this is in Babylon she's called Ishtar. In the Bible she's called Ashtoreth. In Greece she's called Aphrodite. And we think, okay, Venus, nice. There's nothing nice about this thing. This is a dark principality. This is the principality of sexual immorality, unbridled licentiousness. This is what she always was about. And so
this is not love.
This is not.
When you think of Aphrodite, people will think,
And Cupid wasn't about love either.
Yeah.
And so there's nothing nice about it. What she did is she sexualized the spirit sexualizes the culture. Which has never been the case in Western civilization or since the gospel, but it is now. And what she did is she was a prostitute goddess. So what does a prostitute do? A prostitute takes sexuality out of marriage and puts it into the marketplace, puts it into the culture. So what we would expect to happen right now is you have the early 60s, you have Baal, you have the turning away. Then you'd expect, like clockwork, the next one, you'd have something would happen with sexuality. And look what happened. We had it. It's called the sexual revolution. And so it's no accident. Right after we start turning from God, it always happens. We start turning away from basically the biblical morals on sexuality, marriage, on all that. And the thing is that everything that's happened is in the direction of paganism. The values we've replaced now are basically pagan values. And the thing is that she weakened marriage. She's a prostitute weakens marriage. She's weakened marriage across America. It's not an accident. At the same time you have the sexual revolution, you have the destruction of marriage. You have divorce, you have broken homes, you have broken children, you have devalued marriage. It all goes together. This is that goddess. And the other thing about it is, it's like, I would say, like the gods that have returned, or the spirits, their mission is, again, to paganize a Christian or Judeo-Christian nation, just like Israel fell away. And by the way, this happened to Israel too with Ashtoreth, and the Bible warns. But the thing is that she does it through the realm of sexuality. When in ancient Greece, she was worshipped as the great prostitute. And the word in Greece for prostitute is porne. We get the word porn from it. In fact, pornography, the very first pornography that came on the planet was the literature of this goddess and the images of this goddess. So it's really the invention of pornography. Now we have it blanketing America. We have it seducing this nation. And, we mentioned Venus, and I said, okay, Venus and those little Valentine Days things, we have that little cute angel that fires the arrow, Cupid. But really, we use the word erotic, we have an eroticization of our culture. That word comes comes from Eros. Cupid is really Eros. Eros was the child of this goddess. So from this goddess, you have porn, literally, and you have erotica, and you have basically a seduction of the culture that has taken over everything, and it hasn't stopped since the 1960s. That revolution has not stopped; it's continued.
It seemed like for a while that we had beaten some of this stuff back, and then, in the last 20 years, there are things happening now that are completely unreasonable. If you're talking about gay marriage, well, it's about I love him and he loves me, yada, yada. Now we've gotten to where child molestation, child mutilation, teaching children our most precious asset that we could ever have, our children.
Yeah.
And you're bringing deep, dark sex into their life. I mean, it's evil to do that. And any other time we would have said that.
That's right.
And everyone would have agreed.
That's right. It's almost like I don't know. There was a movie called The Invasion of the Body Snatchers. And it's kind of like they keep getting taken over and taken over. Here are people who just a few years ago would say, no, this is terrible. What's taking them over? And the other thing,
that's what I've been asking people. This is why when you put the book out, I'm like, yes, it is demonic. It's possession. Yeah. You cannot speak reason. You can also, you should be able to say, with that big of a change, you should be able to say to your friend, just a few years ago, that was insanity, and we talked about it. Yeah. What new information did you get? None.
None, right.
None.
I say like, where's the new Mount Sinai? Where is it that all of a sudden it's okay? And people, politicians who voted against these things just a little while back are now voting for it. What does that? And nobody can have an answer because it is a possession. And the other thing is that you mentioned is the spirits are always after the children, because if you can get the children, you get the nation. If you get the children, you have the future. And so the gods were always after to destroy the children, to sexualize the children. That goes back, And so the same way now you have this with the children, and that goes with the other one. Well, let me say one thing, Glenn, if I can. That is that another thing that came at the same time, I didn't mention this before, is that this goddess is also the goddess of the occult and of witchcraft and all these things. At the same time you have the sexual revolution, you have this revival of the occult all over. You have more witches in America now than we have Presbyterians in America now. And that is a sign of, that's also a pagan, basically it's paganism. And so that we have that, and she is after the children. I mean, big time. And the other one who's after the children is, you mentioned, is Moloch. And what happened is, and it kind of goes together, because you have the turning, then you have the sexual revolution, and then you have the offering up of children. This is the God who caused Israel. When Israel turned away from God, they ended up offering their children on the altars of Moloch in the Valley of Hinnom, filled with children being offered. I mean, how can anybody do this? But we're doing it. And just like clockwork, at the end of the 60s comes the next step. And this is where we're actually offering up our children. And the thing is that, Jesus said they come back worse. Well, this one, back in ancient Israel, they offered up thousands of their children. We've offered up over 64 million of our children. They come back worse. And the same way we're doing it, you mentioned rituals. The same way they did that back then, we're repeating it in abortion. It actually, I felt led to put in the book how the steps are actually being recreated. And for instance, one of the things is, why did they offer up their children back then? Because they were told, if you do that, you're going to be financially better off. You're going to be rewarded by the God. Your fields will be fertile. You're going to get fine. Well, why are women told to do that? Because if you have a baby, it's going to hurt your career. It's going to hurt your education. Same thing. The other thing is that which children were offered up more than any other back then? The poor. The children of the poor. The poor were actually, we have records of it. Who is offered up now more than any other? The children of the poor. And what they did back then is they played music to drown out the children, crying, doing this. Well, now we drown it out other ways, the horror of abortion. The radical feminists and leaders of abortion have actually talked about abortion as a sacrament.
Yes.
As a sacred right.
Lately, especially lately, I mean, you have out and everybody dismisses it. The Church of Satan,
Okay.
and in, I think it's New Mexico, they have opened up an abortion clinic for ritualistic sacrifice of the children. They've employed doctors, and they say that. And then when somebody asks them, they're like, do you think we actually are doing?
Right.
Well, yeah, just not in the way we think.
Right.
But yes, you are offering these children.
Yeah. It tells you you're on the right side when the Church of Satan is on the other side of whatever it is, and it reveals something that why are they're so for abortion, they're so for against gender, the Satanists. So it tells you something about really what's behind all this, and absolutely we're doing it. I think most people are doing it without realizing what they're doing. This Church of Satan maybe knows a little bit better, but the fact is, Israel was actually destroyed for the children it offered up. We're doing it. This is the most pagan act. And you know what? The only thing that ended this, Glenn, that took this away from the world was the gospel. They were offering up children all over the world, and it was the gospel. But when you take Jesus out, you take the gospel out, you take God out, what's going to happen is they're coming back.
So let me, I know people who have had abortions and or an abortion, and they're ripped apart inside. You never, ever hear from these people because it destroys the narrative that the left wants you to have. But it just rips them apart.
Yeah.
How do you square that with sacrifice? Because we are sacrificing our children.
Yeah.
But
Yeah.
back in the Bible days, you would come and give your baby.
Yeah.
And you knew what you were dealing with. So are you saying that how are they doing?
Yeah, well, you would give your baby to the officiant. Now we give it to the abortionist, but you give it to the officiant who would offer it up. And sometimes parents themselves put their baby on the altar. The thing is, listen, this goes back to the whole thing. When the gods come back, they're not going to come back saying we're gods. They're not going to come back saying, hey, we want to destroy you like we destroyed these nations. We're not going to. They come back in the name of tolerance. They come back in the name of freedom. They come back, just as they did with, they did. So they're not going to say it, and we're not going to realize it. But but all these things we're seeing, we're doing all these things without realizing it. So they're offering it up. They don't realize it. The name, and I started by saying the Hebrew name for these spirits are called the Shadim. It means the destroyers. They destroy. When you destroy your child, you're destroying your own life. You're destroying the fruit of your life. What could cause us to do that? They seek self-destruction of a nation, of children, of a culture. So, it's to their advantage that they don't say who they are.
So I was talking to a guy in Cambridge. He's a doctor of ideas, which I love. And I said, I have a theory I'd like to lay out. Take me half an hour before you'll get the gist in half an hour. And I told him what I was going to do, and he said, there's no way. An hour and a half later, he said, you should get your doctorate of ideas on that. And the idea was that there have been 18 or 19 Holocausts, over time. And if you believe in a Satan figure, he's trying to best God. He thinks he can win. Yeah. The easiest way to beat God is to make him break a promise. If he breaks his word, he's not God.
Yes.
So I think Satan seeing God make this promise to 300 people in the desert? I'm going to be your people, and I'm going to increase your numbers, and Abraham, you are my people.
Yeah.
Okay?
Yeah.
If I'm Satan, I'm standing there going, you're kidding me. All I have to do is just kill all these people?
Yeah.
And every time it happens, it drags something from the past with it.
Yes.
The star sewn onto your clothing.
Yeah.
That was from Persia, like 300 years before. And it jumps at the end of it each time.
Yeah.
And people don't recognize what you just said. It's not going to come as you think. The Nazi death uniforms were made by Hugo Boss. They were like our Marine uniform. They were beautiful and majestic, and nobody saw that as a bad thing. Now we see a guy in black boots and a red armband, and we're like, oh, He's not coming back that way this time, right?
Yeah, and Hitler came in the name of secularism, but it was nothing secular about it. And what you just said, I mean, if I was an atheist or if I was a Martian, I came to the planet, and I saw how there's this satanic fury against this one people, the Jewish people. That would tell me something right away. Yeah, because the Bible says it's going to happen. So you want to see the reality of evil, the reality of God, and the reality of evil or Satan. And and I understand, modern ears, saying, look, you cannot comprehend the Third Reich without Satan. And why was Hitler so obsessed with the Jewish people above all people? God says, you're my witnesses. The promise, you're my witnesses on earth. Well, destroy the witnesses, you don't have God. And he said, I'm going to bring you back to the land. Well, that happened right after the Holocaust. So even though we tried to stop it, this is one of the big things. And I totally agree. There is a link from the time of Abraham to that. Big time.
It is.
It's real.
It has to be. When people don't like to think about Satan, they think that's old-fashioned or whatever. The belief in the Christian values going down in America, according to the latest, but the belief in Satan is going up.
Yeah. How do you do that? How do you not have God and you have Satan? Satan means in Hebrew Satan, the one who comes against. You got to have that. But Satan really proves God without trying to. And the fact that of all the people on earth, why this little people who gave the world the Bible, who gave the world Jesus, why is there a fury against them? Why to wipe them out?
And look at the people who are so angry. It is the source of real violent anti-Semitism again.
Yeah. And it goes together because the same people who are anti-Semitic, generally, not all the time, but in the West, they are also against God, and they're also against the standards of God. And what we are watching right now, I mean, I'm saying, Glenn, this is why I felt I had to write it down, because we're all dealing with this now. I mean, it's happening. It's almost like we're in a movie, and we're saying, well, like, what am I, the last person? Why is everybody going crazy? But there is a reason. There is a reason. Even right now, we're focusing on, and you mentioned with children and mutilation, we're focusing on the destruction of gender. We never think we'd get there. To actually say, if I say there's male and female, that's now controversial. If I say a man and a woman is controversial, how could that be? Well, actually, one of the three, the enchantress, is also called in the book the transformer. And this is so important because this is really behind everything here. And that is, she said in an ancient inscription, she says, I am a woman, I am a man. One of her hymns says, Ishtar, Inanna, you have the power to turn a man into a woman, turn a woman into a man. So here is the principality of the sexual revolution. But this part doesn't start at the beginning. It's too radical. So it didn't happen but as she gets entrenched in culture, now we're dealing with it. And this is the principality that destroys gender, that confuses a man with a woman with a man, and that starts entering our culture. It's so thick you can cut it with a knife. This is so thick.
And you say that gate was opened here in America.
Yes.
By an event at Stonewall, right?
Yes, yeah. We didn't talk about this before, but I think it's important. Yeah, interesting, because when you see, all this...
Remind people what Stonewall is. Most people, I bet, don't know.
Okay, and by the way, listen, as you said at the beginning, we're all in the same boat. We're praying for everybody. We're in the same, but we got to deal with what we're dealing with, because the spirits are against everyone equally. And the thing is that Stonewall was really what launched the whole Pride movement, launched the same-sex, movement. New York always begins in New York. New York's the gate. And the thing is that it was a night when basically it was a raid on a same-sex bar, and they put the people out. The people started charging into the bar to try to break it down with the police inside. They tried to set it on fire with the police inside. They began this big riot, which then began the parades, began everything we know today. It all happened at Stonewall. The bar was called Stonewall. But the amazing thing that I saw is that all these signs of that goddess who transformed sexuality were there that night. One of them, she is the goddess of the gate. She's always, her sign was the gate. So here she is. So it's New York City. She's also the goddess of the alehouses or the taverns. In ancient Sumerian, it was called the Eshdam. She inhabits it. So where did this all begin? At an alehouse, at a tavern, bar. And then it says that there's something called the dance of Ishtar. When she's in the middle of a battle, there's called a dance. In the middle of a riot, people break out in this dance on the streets of New York City. And they start saying words that go back to the tablets of Ishtar. On top of that, there is a sign called, I won't go into the detail, but there's a sign called the lion's head. When she stands on a lion when she goes to battle. That sign was there that night too. Another thing was there was a woman who...
Wait, tell me what that sign was.
Okay. She is Ishtar. She rides into battle on a lion. So the first thing you see, she puts her foot on the head of the lion, showing she is. So the first thing you see is the head. When she's into battle, you see the head of a lion. Right after when Stonewall opened up, right next to it, another bar opened up called the Lion's Head. And on top of that, there was a woman who triggered the whole thing. The history is a woman triggered it that night. The woman was almost like an avatar. She was female, like Ishtar was, but Ishtar had male attributes. So she's female, but she's masculine. And Ishtar was called the storm. He said, "Oh, great storm! You're the storm goddess. Storm, storm." The name of the woman was Storm, who started the whole thing, Storme. The other thing is that there's an ancient, the Epic of Gilgamesh talks about Ishtar, ancient Babylonian Sumerian writing. And it says, "You, Ishtar, are the stone that breaks the stone wall." Literally, the stone wall. And they were trying to break it. And that opened the whole thing, break down this wall. And the other thing is that it happened also at the exact time in the ancient pagan calendar linked to Ishtar, under the weekend of the full moon, of the summer solstice. I mean, there's a whole thing. But the whole thing, it all manifested that night. This is not natural. We're dealing with supernatural.
And it leads to the gay pride parades.
Yeah.
It starts there.
That's right.
And then travels the whole world.
That's right. Yeah.
And tell me the connection between the parade and the name.
Yeah, I'm going to share something that I don't think I've ever even shared. But the first part, when I looked in the ancient tablets, Ishtar is the goddess of parades. It says she causes men to parade through the city streets dressed as women, women to parade as men. Her parades were filled with color and with the bending of sexuality, gender, and licentiousness. So she is the goddess of parades, number one. So it starts here. But also, in Babylon, this is what I haven't shared, there was a gate called the Ishtar Gate, and all the processions started with Ishtar's Gate. So all these processions, as you said, the parades throughout the entire world started in New York City at that bar. The Ishtar Gate had two arches. That bar has two arches. One arch is bigger, one is smaller. Same thing with Stonewall. They're all the brick arches. It's mimicking the Arch of Ishtar. I'm not saying anybody knew it, but all the parades started there. And on top of it, there was one time of the year that this goddess or principality possessed the culture. They had all the parades, processions. And I looked for this, Glenn. I had to look at the early writings of the first Christians because it was still happening. We have a short-term memory. And it said, we don't realize, actually, there used to be parades and they disappeared with the gospel coming in. And the thing is that when I looked in the writings of St. Jerome, he identifies it. The month of the month of the festivals is the month he called in Latin Iunium. We get the word June from it. June was the month of the goddess, and she's the goddess of pride. It's the pride month from ancient times. And so this is the month of the processions. And not only that, Jesus said the spirits go back to the house that they possessed. Well, she possessed June. So now she has repossessed it. And so this month of June.
Because month of June is
Pride Month.
Pride Month
is the month of celebrating.
And it used to be Gay Pride.
Yeah.
And now
they don't even say that. Yeah.
And now it's just Pride.
Yeah. Right.
She was not Gay Pride. She was Pride.
She was the goddess of pride, and she's the goddess of altering sexuality. And through the parades and processions and the month, she possessed a culture, drew the culture into it, and that's exactly what's happening. Glenn, it's not. This is not natural. Is that America celebrates one day to celebrate its birth. One day. We celebrate an entire month. So do nations around the world, more than their own birthdays. We have this. We have never done anything like this before. We've never celebrated sexuality. It's not natural. This is a revival of this is what happens when the gods come back. This is what happens when the spirits come back. This is not some general thing. This is very specific. It's very absolute. And the other thing is that not only that, but there was a sign that was associated with this principality. In the ancient writing, it says Manzat Ishtar, which means, translation, Rainbow Ishtar. She was the goddess of the rainbow. It says that her eyes were rainbow eyes. It's in one of her myths. It says she wages war by stretching across the sky as a rainbow. She uses the rainbow to wage war. She uses the rainbow actually to exact vengeance. There's a very dark thing behind the rainbow. The rainbow belongs to God. I mean, that's the first thing. But one of the things about this principality, it says she steals things from other gods and makes it her own. She literally has taken the sign of God, and now it's in the face of God. We're putting his sign of mercy in the face of God. What is that? I mean, that's a dangerous thing, that from what I can see. And it's also not natural how the rainbow has spread across our culture. I mean, it's on children's cereal boxes. It's on American embassies. We never flew flags about anything else, but we're doing it. It's not natural. So this all goes back to the goddess.
I look at God as my dad. I'm just the perfect dad. And I know as a dad, if one of my kids is going bad, I don't want my other kid to bash and destroy that kid.
Right.
I want that kid, help me bring my kid back.
That's right.
Right?
That's right.
So this is why I think it's so important to say we're fighting principalities. Yeah. We are fighting evil. We're not fighting the people.
No.
Because people they've just lost their mind.
Yeah, we're all in the same boat.
Yes.
Paul, when he speaks to the early church, he says, "Listen, such were some of you. You were doing this, you were doing that, you were doing that." We're all in the same boat. But if we don't speak truth, we got to speak truth in love. If we don't speak truth, we are not going to win them. We're not going to be able to save anybody. That's just as bad. If somebody is dying of something and we don't say something, we're accountable to that. The other thing is that this goddess, it says she grinds away the masculinity of men. Okay. So what is that happening in our culture? She will seek to, there's an anti-masculine spirit in this culture. She raged against them. She raged against authority. She raged against her father. She raged against the patriarchy of the gods. So now we have this raging against the, quote, patriarchy. Her job is to take men away from manhood, men away from marriage, men away from women, men away from being men. And basically that's what's been happening.
And weren't her temple workers?
Yes.
Didn't they mutilate themselves and wear dresses?
They had her priesthood. I put this in the book, and it's and I always want to put in the actual quote so people know we're not making this up.
Right.
This is and that is that it says her priests were called the Asinu, and the Asinu were these men who dressed up as women. They walked around her temples in women's clothes, women's makeup. They spoke with women's voices, and they basically, it said, because one of the tablets says not just you turn, but you dress men as women, you dress women as men. And so they were there, and think about this. This is public. This is celebrated by the culture, pagan culture. And they would bring their children to the temples to see the priests, to be influenced by the priests. Children to the men dressed up as women. Well, does that sound familiar? Because now this is taking over our culture. This is the priesthood of the goddess, and they don't realize it. But we are bringing children to men dressed up as women to sexualize the children. This is back. This goes to her temple. And one difference, Glenn, is this. Jesus said they come back stronger or they come back worse, and that is that back then she possessed her priesthood. Now she's seeking to take possession of an entire generation of children. And now where our children were once led in the Lord's Prayer in school, they are now led to question their own gender. I mean, what is that? And this is where even...
And it is a God.
Yeah.
It is a God. We say we've taken out prayer and worship. We've replaced that with this God.
We're going to worship. We're going to serve no matter what. And, Glenn, if we knew, we're not old enough to know, but if we were there when America said, let's just take prayer out of school, and we had known what the Bible really says about this, we could have said, where you're going to be. We wouldn't know when.
Well, people did, though. It was the Supreme Court that did that.
Yeah.
It was, 7 or 9 people.
That's right. And yet today, if you talk about putting prayer in school, that sounds radical for America. But the thing is that when you take God out, you're going to have all these things. The parades are coming back. The gender confusion is coming back. The killing of children is coming back. It's all coming back. So this is, and not only, Glenn, not only was it the clothes you alluded to, but that some of her priests were actually surgically transitioned. Literally organs removed, and that affected their hormones, all that. These were her priests. And the thing is that I found one ancient inscription where the priests are dancing. It's actually men who are transitioned are dancing before the goddess with scalpels, and they're basically, it's like they're celebrating their transition. I mean, and now we're trying to do it to children, and even non-believers are saying, what would possess an adult to do this to a child? This would possess an adult to do it to a child. This would. And it's the spirit, we are all dealing with it. I mean, and it's taking over our culture. And you mentioned the Supreme Court. Let me just see how deep this is, that the Supreme Court made 3 rulings that basically transformed sexuality and ultimately marriage. We all remember the day when marriage, after millennia, was, struck down. Well, all of these decisions, the first one took place in 2003, the last one in 2015, marriage. And the 3 of them, the first one took place in the month of June, month of the goddess, took place in the last days of June. That's particularly her time, the time of the summer solstice. The first one took place on June 26. The second one in 2012 struck down the Defense of Marriage Act. That took place end of June, last days of June, days of the goddess, summer solstice, and June 26th, the exact same day. The last one, marriage, when it was struck down, as we know it, last days of June, summer solstice, June 26th, same exact day. The Supreme Court is not looking at the Babylonian calendar, and they're not saying, you know what, let's do it this way. That tells you how deep this is.
Well, they do release everything in June. But
Many
to be
things.
June 26th.
Exact day. Yeah, exact day. And here's the other thing, Glenn. We all remember, on that day, that night, the president lit up the White House in the colors of the rainbow. Okay, now the rainbow is the sign of the goddess. It's kind of like giving America, we're giving America to that. But that was the day. That day on the ancient calendar of Babylon and the Bible, it was the 10th day of Tammuz. Tammuz is the month of the goddess. And by the way, it was one of the lovers who she destroyed is Tammuz. But that's the month that happened. And so, and I looked at the ancient Babylonian calendar. It said the 10th of Tammuz is appointed to cast a spell to cause a man to love a man. That was the day the Supreme Court changed marriage, on the day. And they don't know about the calendar, and they're not looking at that. That was the day, but it's like clockwork.
Okay, spend 2 or 3 minutes on Moloch, because we touched on him, but he's the final one, the destroyer.
Yeah, he's the final one in his entrance, But right now, what I would say is, and notice what the culture is focusing on: abortion, the war over abortion, over children, and this war over gender. It's all the same thing.
And it's all sacrificing children.
Yeah, either way. And back then, the children were sexualized in the same way. They were abused. It wasn't safe to be a child when the gods are leading.
Well, I will tell you that, I think you go even further than this. What we're doing on the border, we are turning a blind eye to sex slavery with children in unbelievable numbers. Unbelievable numbers.
Yeah. And you notice it all goes together. They're at the same time, the culture is beginning to start to try to normalize pedophilia. It's beginning, but that's what happens when you destroy marriage. That there's no more protection, and that's what happens when you go back to paganism, because the children were sexualized. The children were made into prostitutes. Back then, children were confused. Children were mutilated. It's all happening. I'll tell you something that I don't say, if it's okay, Glenn. Not often. When I was working on the book that's linked to Moloch, when I was working on the book. And I didn't tell anybody, and I'm a pastor, and I have associate pastors. And one of them, who never, ever would talk to me like this, he said, Johnathan, he says, I was woken up in the morning and I had this, like a vision. I was like shaking. I had a word for you. And I said, I don't know what it means, but I knew it was for you. So he tells me, I said, what was it? He said, I saw you bringing forth a word, and all in front of you were all these altars of these gods, all these altars of the gods. As you brought forth the word, the altars started breaking apart. It's actually from the Bible. Breaking apart. And these spirits started coming out of them. And I said, I don't know what this is. And so I said, okay, I know what this is. I'm working on this book. It's a Return of the Gods, all that, the altars. By the way, I want to say something about that, Glenn. But the altars, we talk, all the gods had altars. So talk about the greatest altar we have right now is that of abortion. Where we actually, 60 million, that's a big altar. So, because the gods always demand blood or destruction, shedim. And so the altars are all there. But I'll tell you something that happened. So I finished the book. I finished the book on June 24th. Okay. June 24th, the altar began to break. That was the date that the Supreme Court overturned Roe versus Wade. Wow. When you bring forth the word. So the thing is, and to me, I take this as I know, listen, we know that's not the end of abortion, but we know it's major. And that is that we've already saved, I think, like 60,000 children per year, But the thing is that in the Bible, when you had revival, because we're praying for revival. I mean, without revival, America's lost. But in the same with Israel. What happened to Israel. But the thing is, the sign of revival wasn't a gospel crusade tent. It was the altar. They broke the altars of the gods. They literally broke the altars. And so this is a sign, I believe, from God of encouragement to us that, listen, the gods do not have the last word. God has the last word. And there can be revival, but we have to pray. We have to fast. Like when I was on the program with you, and I was so blessed, I never heard anybody do this, calling for national prayer and fasting for exorcism, not just for a person. It says these things. Let's pray. I was like, when I'm writing this, why don't we pray for the release of America, exorcism of America, for the Spirit to come in. So there is hope. I always bring hope.
I'll tell you, I talked to a Catholic priest who is an exorcist, and he said, I talked to him a little bit about your book, and he said, it's what's happening. He said, I do this for a living. And he said, what I see one-on-one is happening throughout society. Yeah. And he said, and I told him, I said, I'm thinking about calling for prayer and fast, because that's what the apostles came to Jesus and said, how come you can get the Spirit out? We've been trying. And he said, because it doesn't happen without prayer and fasting.
Yeah. Oh, that was so, I've never heard anybody do that. And I when I was working on the book, I'm feeling a burden, because I don't know that's actually been done. I mean, people have prayed and fast for people, but for an entire culture to get delivered in whatever manner, whatever we are right now, it doesn't matter, whoever's watching this. And again, I was an atheist, I became a believer because of God, but there are people watching from whoever you are, it doesn't matter. We're all dealing with it. You're dealing with it. Your family's dealing with it. Your children are dealing with it. We're all dealing with it. And one of the things that I say is that to know is that this is a war. It's a spiritual war, not against people. It's a war. But, remember that when the gods were driven out, or the spirits were driven out of Western civilization, it was by believers. I mean, it was the gospel, it was the word, it was the power of God, and it was Christians. As that came out, that's what happened. So they've come back with a vendetta. They're targeting Christians, the gods, the spirits, because they want to get, as they were cast out, they want believers to be cast out of the society. As the word drove them out, they want the word out. As their worship was kind of ended, they want the worship, religious freedom to end in America. So we're in a battle. And another thing about it is that the ones of Rome that really defeated the gods or the spirits, it was the children. Because back then, it was the children who came to the gospel. The older generation was steeped in paganism. It was the children. So now they're seeking to get the children to cast God out, to exorcise God from the culture. So we're dealing with a real battle. But I want to, and the other thing is, I want to encourage everybody, but one thing is that when the gods come in first, or the spirits, they always come in the name of tolerance, openness, do your own thing. Everybody, that's how it was in the 60s. But that's only a strategy to get in the door of a Christian civilization. So they did. But once they start, get a foothold, once they do, then all tolerance goes out the window. It turns from tolerant culture to a cancel culture.
Correct.
And so it's every knee shall bow. Remember when Baal took over the culture of Israel under Ahab and Jezebel, it was every knee shall bow and every tongue will confess. And all of a sudden, believers are now a counterculture, they have to stand stronger than ever before. So that's where we are right now. So it's to cancel you, silence you, deplatform you, whatever it is. We cannot be silent, though. We cannot be silent because this I believe can be our greatest hour. Truly, I believe. And I want to say something that I have not, Glenn. I've not said. I've said it at our congregation, but just to point something out. It was because it was just happened a little while back. Biden had a gathering at the White House, and he enshrined basically same-sex marriage into federal law for the first time. And and he did that and said, Everyone has to recognize this. Okay, now listen, we love people, but we can't recognize what's sin. But, and he lit up the White House again with a rainbow, that the day when he lit it up, the night when he lit up the White House, it was, I believe it was the 20th of Kislev. Now, interesting, because there's only one day in the Bible that God's for marriage, but there's only one day he says, I can't recognize this. I can't recognize this marriage. It's the book of Ezra. They went against his will. He said, I can't. He said that on the 20th of Kislev, the day that was the Respect for Marriage Act. God said, I can't respect it. So it's telling you that God has the last word, and the thing is that, as a believer, I'm actually, even though this is a warning, because we have to know what we're dealing with. We have to know what we're fighting, because if you don't know, you're not going to win. You have to know it. It's real, but we do have a greater power. We do have a higher power, and that there's only one true God, and the others are false. We have that power, but if we don't do anything, like we were saying, if a lot of times the people who are silent are the people who should be the most vocal. The pastors should be, the minister should be the most, but many of them are silent. They say, well, I don't want to get in trouble. I don't want to say anything. Well, then you're not a light. Then what are you doing?
You're not a follower of Christ. Look at every single one of the apostles, except for one, died in a horrible way.
Yeah.
Right?
Yeah.
I mean, they weren't popular. That's not.
We're not here to be popular. We're here
somebody
to,
said today, I read, the most punk rock thing you can do is go to church.
Yeah,
because it's not popular.
Yeah, you know what, Glenn? In many ways, that's more biblical than what we've known. Because many people who are watching probably say, "I prayed. I wish I could live in biblical times. I wish." Congratulations, you're in Bible times now. Because for most of Bible times, you didn't have a Christian culture. You had Christianity was radical. God is radical, revolutionary. The gods are not a new thing. They're back. They're back, and they're back in a new way, but they're not new. Moses, he dealt with the gods of Egypt. The Bible says Elijah stood against Baal. Paul stood against the gods of Rome. Now it's our turn. And we have to be what we are called to be. We have to move from we're not a cultural phenomenon, we're a countercultural phenomenon, which is really always what we were supposed to be. But this I believe, when the grays are disappearing, it's time for the lights to get brighter. And it's kind of like if the dark is removing the gray to get even darker, the light has to remove the gray to get even lighter. These are the times we have to shine even brighter.
I haven't told this for a long time. I grew up in Seattle, 310 cloudy days out of the year.
Okay.
I moved to Phoenix, not a cloud in the sky ever, okay? And I remember one of the first days I was there, I stood outside and I just watched the shadow that I was casting because it was so dark and crisp. I had never seen it. I had always seen kind of just like a shadow here on the table. It's just barely there, because the sun wasn't bright. And I've taken that lesson my whole life as only when the light is getting brighter is the shadow more defined and seemingly darker. Yeah. But the light is there.
Yeah, and that's an encouragement that there's kind of been a gray Christianity, because when everybody's Christian, it doesn't necessarily mean something. Yeah. We're all Christian. I grew up in that culture. You grew up in everything, but now it means something. It means more than it has ever meant. Now to follow God, follow Jesus, it's going to cost, but it's more important than ever. The candle in the daytime, you barely see it. The candle at night literally lights up the world, and that's what we're supposed to be. We're supposed, and the other thing, and you said something very interesting, because as you said it, I thought, okay, well, the light's getting brighter. Well, the light's coming. We're getting closer to that. When all hell broke loose on the world, Israel was coming. The prophecies were coming. All that was coming. So all hell breaks loose. So it's a good sign. Jesus is called the Lamb of God. He's also called the Lion of Judah. And he's coming. And the thing is that this is to be. This.
By the way, Christians have got to start looking more for the lion.
Yeah. Yeah.
You know, the lion stood up and roared.
Yes. Yeah. And this is the time. And the thing is, this is going to separate. You know, like, yeah, it takes a little bit more to stand for God when it's not popular, but it means so much more. The power will be so much more. You know, it says, there's a scripture I love. It says, the eyes of the Lord search the entire earth looking for the one whose heart is his completely. He'll lift that one up. And we have to be that one. And so this could be our most exciting hour, but we got to live. And the other thing is that if there's anything in our life that is, you know, gray, you know, we got to get it out.
Yeah.
We got to become these people. But the thing about it is that when you hear all these stories, like the great testimonies, or people who hid Jews during Hitler, it's the dark that actually increased the light. You know, because it makes you radical. Because you can say, listen,
you have to choose.
Yeah.
Because at times of great peril, there's nobody on the sidelines. Everyone is on the field.
Yes, that's
you
right.
know?
That's
you
right.
might say I'm sitting on the sidelines, but you're not. You're fighting for the other team. By doing that.
Yeah, it's kind of like you were standing and the ground is going this way, and you got to make this. But if you make the right decision, you're going to be lifted up. You're going to be even greater. The power of God is just as good. And listen, the other thing is, the Bible says this is all going to happen. You know, I mean, the Bible does say that you know, I got saved because I was reading the prophecies. The Bible said, wow, it's coming true. But the Bible says that in the last days, men will be lovers of self. They'll be seducing spirits, evil. They'll persecute believers. Okay, there's a mystery that kind of like the age comes to its conclusion the way it began. There was an Israel in the world then. When Jesus came, Israel back. There were Jewish believers. We're back. You know, Jewish and Gentile. There's church being close to Israel. That hasn't. Sorry about that. Hasn't been for 2,000 years. You know, but also the culture was pagan. So actually, it is actually what we're watching is actually the return. So if the world's going back to where it was, it's time that the church go back to where it was, which was the book of Acts, the most powerful church. You know, we may not have all the praise of the world, and we may not have the riches of the world, but we'll be more powerful. And this is our moment. Listen, we live once.
And I've always tried to really understand, and the foolish shall confound the wise.
Yeah.
It's so clear now. All the wise, all of the elites, all of the book-learned people, they're all on that side. And they think we're foolish. And I mean, it's the meek shall inherit the earth. All of this stuff is coming.
It's crazy. It says in the same thing you quoted from 1 Corinthians, the foolishness of God will confound the wisdom of the world.
Yes.
And the thing is, how do they not know that there's male and female anymore? I mean, you know, 3-year-olds know that. How come the Nobel Prize, they don't know it anymore? It's foolishness, but it tells you how real this is, you know, and that how wise it is to follow the foolishness of God. You know, the cross is wiser, you know. And to me, this just confirms where we are. It confirms us, it confirms our faith. This is right. We're on the right track, you know, and we got to be strong, you know, go all out for the Lord. This is our moment. And I truly believe this could be our greatest moment, because I always would love to have lived in the book of Acts. It's back. You know, we're back. You know, the dark is back, but so is the light, you know. So this could be the greatest time for us, but we have to rise to it. And you got to know what you're fighting, you know, and don't be timid about goodness. Don't be timid with your family. Be strong in love. But listen, this is our hour. The other thing I thought of is that what's the most exciting, you know, time of a movie? The last 15 minutes. So listen, God chose us for the last 15 minutes. You know, if he didn't want us here, don't fear it, because if he didn't want us here, you know, he would have put us in the Middle Ages.
Yep.
He has us here, and that means, and you know, the greatest part of the movie is when there's a lot of conflict. Okay, listen, that's the ground to shine for the Lord.
My dad died when he was 85. He was not old enough for most of World War II. Then when he joined, he had flat feet, so he was kicked out. He was not part of anything in the 60s, both good or bad. Right. He was just kind of, you know. Right. And I thought, he lived at the zenith of American clout and power. Yeah. You didn't really have to do anything. I wonder who he would have been had he lived in my time now. Because they didn't have, there were a few giants, okay? But for the most part, everybody else was like, there's no anymore. And you're either going to give your grandchildren the greatest gift when they stand up and talk about history, that when those times came, my grandparents stood and did this, or when they're in history class, they're not going to want to say anything.
Yeah.
Because it's very much like Germany is now.
I was just thinking Germany, and the thing is, it's most people go with the majority, but you know what? Most of the time, the majority isn't right. Yeah, it happened to be better in the past, but it's not right now. You got to stand for God. But I will just, as an encouragement to everybody watching, God is stronger. He will never leave you. He will never forsake you. You just stand for him. Do what's right. He will lift you up. He will protect you. Get right with Jesus. Get right with whatever you have to do. Do it, because your God is real. And you know what? Jesus is the Lord above all lords, the God above all gods. That's pretty good.
Johnathan Cahn, thank you.
Thank you, Glenn.
The name of the book is The Return of the Gods, available everywhere. Thanks.